In this presentation, I'm going to talk about quantitative collection methods. So this is using figures instead of kind of words as evidence, and it's much more easier to analyze than qualitative. There are two types of data collection that we can do. The first one is primary research, and this is when you collect data or you research something yourself. So literally you go out and get the research yourself. So it could be going out interviewing people or giving out your own questionnaires or doing experiments, etc. And this is all done completely yourself. You don't get any information or results from anyone else or any other resources. Advantages of doing this is that you get exactly what you're looking for because you're doing it yourself. So sometimes you might get it from someone else or off the internet and it won't be exactly what you're looking for. Also, it's very reliable because obviously you're doing it yourself, so you know what's happening in the research, and you don't know if you got it from someone else, you wouldn't know what they would have done. And also it could be more trusted because you know it isn't out of date, so other research that you might find might be too dated for your scenario. And the second one is secondary research. This is when you get the data or research from other people or sources, so it's literally opposite of primary research. So for example, you could go onto the internet to look up data that you wanted to find out on an athlete. So you, as the researcher, has no input in taking part of getting the data. Advantages of doing this is that it's very inexpensive. So literally you just need kind of a Wi-Fi kind of connection or a library or something compared to the cost of running the research yourself. So that is an advantage. But on the other hand, you don't know how reliable the data is, so the quality of the research might be quite low, and the researcher might have even been biased as well. And again, it could be dated as well, so it won't be relevant to current age, etc. There are 4 different types of levels of measurement. The first is nominal. This deals with variables that are non-numeric, so where the numbers have no value. Participants will be put into categories and then counted. So for example, people with blue, brown or green eyes, they're put into categories. And this doesn't mean that one group is necessarily better than the other. It has no meaning, it's just in categories. So that labels have no meaning whatsoever. An example of using this is putting a group of gymnasts in event categories, and then from this we can find out the mode or the percentage of people in each group, and this is an advantage of it. And then we could represent the data in a pie chart. But on the other hand, there are some disadvantages, and this could be that we can't work out an average because of the labels. The categories have no meaning or value. Also, this data isn't very informative either. The second type is ordinal data. This is when it's ranked data basically, so it gives no indication of the difference between levels either. So the difference or distance between the categories is unknown, but the numbers allocated do. They have a meaning. So e.g. race position, you won't know the times between them, but you know the place. An example of ordinal data in gymnastics is ranking them on their position. So whoever got the highest score will be ranked 1, but whoever gets the third highest score will be ranked 3rd. But this doesn't tell us the difference between points. Advantages of using this is that we get a bit more information than, say, nominal data, so we can get mean and medians from it. But the disadvantage is that we can't find out any kind of averages, or we can't multiply or divide them or anything, because we don't know the difference between each ranking. So it doesn't really give us that much information. And just to go back to nominal data quick, because I forgot to add a disadvantage for it, is that it lacks a lot of information. It only tells us categories, so we can't really work anything out from it. It's very hard to analyze. The next one is interval data, and I'm going to talk about ratio data as well. Combined, these are both data that we call continuous data. So this is probably the most used way because it's the most informative, and both ways are very similar. Interval data is when there are defined distances between each of the values. So it's a numerical scale with meaningful order. There is no, but in this one there is no zero, so it can drop below zero. Sorry. So this could be an example of temperature. So temperature can obviously go below zero. So for example, in gymnastics context, measuring body temperature of gymnasts before and after a plyometric training session. And this is a very informative measure. You can find out frequencies and percentages, but the only thing you can't do with this data is multiply and divide it, so that would be a disadvantage. And ratio is pretty much the same as interval, but they are slightly different because ratio has a meaningful zero, so values can't drop below zero. So for example, height. So an example I've got is measuring a group of gymnasts, just measuring a group of gymnasts' height, because obviously their height can't drop below zero. And this is the most informative way because you can use statistical analysis on it. You can find out modes, frequencies, percentage, and you can also multiply and divide them. So you can use a lot of statistical analysis, unlike on the others we can only use some and not all. Experimental research. There are three types of experiment. There's true experiment, which is what we aim for in sports science. This is when the subjects have been randomly assigned and there is tests done before and after to see results. There's pre-experiment, which is usually there's pre-experiment also, which is usually used in sport as a whole. It has a pre and post-treatment test, but lacks a group control. And then there's a quasi experiment as well, which has both pre-test and post-test as well. When doing experiments, there are some ethical issues as well. There should be no deception involved, and it is important for the researcher to debrief participants and gain consent to use their data as well. And they should also have informed consent and give them the right to withdraw as well. There's a laboratory experiment. This is when the experiment is done in a lab and it gives the highest control over outside variables, basically. But it often uses expensive, very accurate and technical equipment. So using a lab gives you more control over extraneous variables, and only the independent variable will affect the dependent variable. But again, this is expensive to do, which is a disadvantage. But an advantage of using this is that you have control, as I said, over variables, so therefore you have more precision and a greater chance of identifying a cause and effect relationship. But on the other hand, it could be a disadvantage because they won't be in their natural environment. It'll be in a lab, so it's not what they're used to, and it might become too artificial and could lose validity. Then we have field experiments. This is where the experiment is carried out in the natural environment of the participant. It is used in a situation where it is important to take into account the environment, so it improves realism. Field-based is cheap and very easy to access the facilities. An advantage of using this is participants are less aware and conscious that they're part of a study, because obviously they're in the natural environment instead of a lab, and the results are more generalizable to real life situations. But on the other hand, there's some disadvantages, and this could be that extraneous variables are very hard to control. So also, like outside factors could affect the results. For example, condition of the surface. It could be very wet or icy, and this is very hard. Well, it's almost impossible to be controlled. Now I'm going to talk about observation, notational analysis. This is when the researcher observes participants and collects numerical data. For example, someone could go and watch to see how many times a gymnast makes a mistake in each of their routine, and from this they can find out an average. They can put it into a table, as you can see above. That's one for successful passes. This sort of observation could be an advantage of using, because you can video them and then you can annotate after as well, and this can save time. You can clearly identify strengths and weaknesses from this of the individuals. So where do they make mistakes? Do they do this consecutive times, for etc. On the other hand, there are some disadvantages. This could be that the researcher may miss some behaviour, so they might actually miss something that could be very crucial in the results. And to do this type, that you will need some sort of training and experience as well. And lastly, I'm going to talk about a questionnaire. There isn't much to say about this. It's basically collecting numerical data, and is mainly closed questions. So it's not asking to expand on any questions. It would literally be asking questions like, what is your weight? Instead of saying, why do you smoke? So it's very closed questions, and the graph above shows the results of a questionnaire, which illustrates the effects of exercise on mood data. So as you can see, it gives you numerical data and is represented in a graph.